the usual practicalities. So first of all, after hearing from our speaker, there'll be plenty of time for questions, and you can either do that by popping your question in the chat or by putting your little yellow hand up, and I'll bring you in to ask your question. And then secondly, just to say that we are recording today's event. So if you could please keep yourselves on mute, keep your videos turned off, but you can turn your video on later if you want to ask a question. That's it from me. I'm going to hand over to the Environment Agency's Anthony Herford to introduce our speaker. Thank you, Anthony.
Thanks both. I'm Senior Advisor of Strategic Environment Planning. I lead on economic assessment for planning, and I take a very holistic and systemic view on that. So Diana Pound changed my life, but I only realised this relatively recently. I'm part of the Environment Agency's facilitation network, and late last year I volunteered to support Diana's company, Dialogue Matters, when they were running a large stakeholder workshop for the Love Windermere Partnership in the Lake District, to bring lots of perspectives together there about a very important issue, the pollution in Windermere. I'd previously trained in good practice for stakeholder dialogue in about 2012 with Diana, so I was very keen to work with Dialogue Matters, having not had a chance to do so since then. A refresh training course before the Windermere workshop for all the volunteer facilitators from the EA, and it really struck me going through that, recognising some of the material from that course back in 2012, and which had really influenced all my thinking, work and life since. That course in 2012, a 3-day course, I came to it with real world experience of complex problems through working in rainforest conservation and tsunami disaster relief in Indonesia for a few years. I was probably a bit exasperated by what I'd seen in those two contexts. Diana's course really opened my eyes to the power and potential of bringing people in the right way to have those challenging conversations to help move forward together. It really felt like the missing piece of the puzzle for me, of how we can start to sort out some of the messy problems we face as a society and a species. That doesn't mean it's easy, but it is necessary. I don't think it can be avoided. And we can use lots of solid science to inform what is also undoubtedly a real art. I hope some of you will feel similarly about it, hearing from Diana today. And I'm always open to a conversation about facilitation, either inside or outside the EA. So get in touch if you'd like to do that. It's my great pleasure to welcome Diana Pound.
Thanks, Anthony. Can I just check people can hear me okay? So somebody,
yeah,
Anthony, I can only see, yeah, brilliant. Yeah, okay, well, golly, I now don't know quite how to proceed. That's such an incredible introduction to change somebody's life. Wow. Well, look, I'm really delighted to be here. Just to let everybody know, my background's environmental science and landscape ecology, and working for many, many years for the Conservation Agency, depending what name it had at any particular time. And I came to this work about 25 years ago or more, when I was managing one of the first European marine sites in England. And there was so much tension and conflict around that being looked after for nature, that there were formal objections by the port and the local authority to the Secretary of State, which is the only one in the country that, or in the UK, as far as I know, that did that. And then I was obviously then the ecologist and got somebody who got the skills I've now got, but definitely didn't have then. And over a year, crafted, skillfully done, carefully planned and designed consensus process, we reversed 20, 30 years of non-cooperation in a really complex situation. And that still has a legacy today. So there is still, if anybody had loads of research done on it, but if anybody went back now, they would still find that there was a legacy of trust, working together, open-mindedness to finding different solutions. So it has left a real legacy. So my presentation today is going to cover, first of all, some thoughts I've got about why we need to bother with this stuff, and then some evidence from research for multi-party participation. Then why regulators can share decision power, because we're often getting told in our work that we do at Dialogue Matters as that's not possible, but it is. A bit about psychology and decision making and some conditions for success. So I'm really, as a science-trained person, really interested in what's the evidence and how can we continually improve the practice that we do at Dialogue Matters. And that's partly what's led us to win awards and get the reputation we have, because I want to know what's the evidence. And if we don't know the evidence is then our experience, but if we do know, let's use the evidence. So the evidence base for this presentation is we're currently doing some work about landscape governance and justice for natural England. We've done previous work on participation and what works and how does it work. And we've also done a big old tome for the Scottish Government, which was about engagement, empowerment in land use and land management. And those are the three opportunities we've had to really dig into the research ourselves, because mostly we're being practitioners. So it's a real joy when we get a chance to really read up on what's the latest and so on. And you'll see almost waves of that in this presentation, because you'll see that dates are suddenly sort of like, I don't know, 10 years ago or something. And that was the last time we were able to look at all of that. And then some are really up to date because we've just been able to do that. But I've also got this about 27 years of pioneering and learning and doing in this space. And that's across 150 projects-ish. Some of that's very local, some of it's global. We've done global water futures, we've done global climate change, so we've done huge, big strategic level things, but also we can do better management of a small national trust estate. And we apply exactly the same principles, ethics. Practices can alter a little bit, but we're coming in with the same understanding. We've worked in very conflicted situations, so we've run probably the only workshop in the country where we brought pro and anti-badger cull people into the same space, and there were people in that space who had taken illegal action against each other on both sides of that spectrum. And at the end of one day, they managed to agree 5 things they wanted to do together. Complex, conflicted across various different habitats and topics. We've done quite a lot of work on species conservation recently. We've done dolphin and whales in the Red Sea, not in the Red Sea, in the Med and the Black Sea. So, and we're currently doing climate change. We're possibly doing something on biofuels soon. We're also doing peatland restoration at the moment for natural England. So we're across lots and lots of different subjects. We've worked across many different countries and different continents, and therefore also worked across cultures, different sectors, different levels. And we often work with scientists. So in India, about 2 months ago, we were working with 70 scientists based at universities in either India, Japan or the UK to come together on new collaborations on the theme of resilient planet. So we do about 1/3 of our work is in a research context. So here's some of my thoughts about why I need to bother to really get to grips with this. Environmentalists, and I speak as one, we love to focus on natural, technical, economic data and science, things that we can really sort of get to grips with and have data and graphs, and it all be really, well, not exactly clear cut, but it all feel like something we can get to grips with a bit more. And we have historically and continue in many contexts to overlook the social and psychological evidence about what works, both in terms of decision making and participation. I'm hoping to introduce a little bit of that today. But if we don't understand that, then that's going to affect the way we make decisions, the quality of the decision making, and the quality, therefore, of the outcomes. We've also come across in the Scottish work and more recently that participating engagement specialists in the different agencies in the UK feel like their work is seen as they're second-class citizens. It's not serious. It's touchy-feely, fluffy stuff. It's not important. And they themselves are unaware of the strong evidence base there is for this, and therefore they lack confidence in speaking to colleagues about why this stuff matters and why getting it right and doing it well matters. And that also then leads to a lot of in our view, poor practice going on. And for me personally, I've been passionate about nature and climate since I was 17, and we're out of time to keep reinventing the wheel. There is a lot of evidence about what works, and for me, we just need to start applying it and getting that right. So that's my reasons, but there are evidence-based reasons, so I just want to touch on those now as well. So reasons for multi-party participation. By multi-party, I mean multiple different stakeholders, including whoever is sponsoring the process. We think of that organisation as the stakeholder too, in whatever the change is, but I would mean multiple different interests. So it's not just sectoral, it's not just environmentalists together making decisions, or environmentalists and sometimes social scientists, or sometimes farmers, but that's it. Where's tourism, where's business, where's recreation, where's young people? It's just not, they're just not there. So some of the research we get from the academic papers, but we're not a research institute. So when we're not being able to work with people in research institutes, I access some of what I know through books that they have themselves collated and brought together things from multiple different backgrounds. So we've got, so I'll just read some of this out. I know you can all read. Some people take in, this is a bit of psychology, some people take in knowledge through their ears, some people by reading, some people by hearing. I could here's some background noise. Is it possible that somebody could mute wherever that source is? I can't see myself, so that would be great. So wise decisions result from diverse knowledges. So there's some evidence for that. People are much more open-minded to other people's points of view when they believe they themselves will shortly need to explain their perspective to diverse others. So it opens up minds to new possibilities and perspectives. People are more creative in a diverse setting, provided they feel it's safe to communicate and that's trusted and that they personally feel psychologically safe in that space. And people are much more willing, and this is quite a key one, I think, to accept outcomes that are not their own first preference if they think the process by which the decisions are made has legitimacy. Then they'll say, okay, we grappled with all sorts of possibilities here. This is where we've arrived at. It's not my preference, but I trust the legitimacy of this process. I'll accept it. And I think that's a really important thing to know. There's also things about distance from place. So in environment, obviously, a lot of the work is place-based. And environmental specialists often aren't anywhere near the place that the decisions are being made about, whether it's a river or a national park or a flood area or whatever it is. And the reason for that is, and that changes the views of the risk and rewards of any change. Obviously, less detailed knowledge about how it all works in real life, but crucially, far less emotional, spiritual, cultural connection to a place. And that means that you can make decisions that are really insensitive with the perspective you've got, it looking absolutely sensible, but are really insensitive and not maybe factored in other things and consequences of that decision, because you've not got that emotional connection to the place that the decision's being made about. We also need to doing multi-party participation reduces the risk of causing social and psychological shock and trauma. And we work in so many contexts where those people who are experiencing that are kind of blamed as being a bit stupid or a bit unimaginative or not realizing how serious things are. But actually, they're going through real psychological distress. So as human beings, we have a really strong connection to the place, to where we live or where we grew up. And a change to it is experienced as trauma. And that can be, even if it's a positive change, it's a shock to our system. And there's this lovely word, solastalgia, which was best exemplified by the sycamore gap tree being cut down, and the outcry of anguish and pain, and all the stories that flew out. People who've been there and got engaged there or whatever, had moments there in their lives, and that sort of existential stress that people were hearing. And on the same day, a big report came out of, I think, Natural England about the state of conservation nature. And it was not good reading, but that hardly got any press interest. Or one tree, and a sycamore tree at that, got masses. Well, why? Well, it's because of this, because there's connection to place and the experience of pain, suffering and grief when something changes that you value. There's also normal science is not enough. So this actually goes right back to 1991, when some researchers looked at what can applied normal science do when you're in increasing levels of uncertainty on the x-axis and decision stakes are getting increasingly high on the y-axis. And these terms came and went, so they're not in current use at all. But they talked about applied normal science. Then the more complex and the more uncertain you're in the space where expert professional judgment may get you there and do the job. But when you're in really high stakes and really high uncertainty, so there's disputed values, decisions are urgent, there's lots of complexity, they describe it as post-normal science, and they start beginning to talk about the need to do things in participatory ways. We've also got multiple knowledges and ways of knowing, and this is the lovely little story from India of it's actually, I've sort of been PC about this and they've got blindfolds on, but the actual traditional story is about 5 blind men and an elephant. And I'm sure you've heard it, that they all perceive the elephant and argue furiously that, it's like a tree trunk, or it's like a rope, or it's like a brush, or the poor chap off on the top right. No, it's soft and mushy. So we have inevitably our particular perspectives and our particular understanding, and unless we bring all a wider set of knowledges together, then we're sort of actually stuck with an incomplete picture that is not going to help us get where we need to get to. So again, multi-stakeholder, multi-participant dialogue ends up with, you avoid the risks of narrow and linear thinking. You get to understand some of the causal links. You can work on solutions in a much wider way and avoid unintended consequences. And you can also avoid the short-term benefit at long-term cost trap that we often fall into. And I'm not going to talk, I'm sure there's systems thinking, I know there's systems thinking experts on here, but I just want to really and I would love to tell you the story in that picture. That's about transboundary river basin management in Africa, and senior scientists from across sub-Saharan Africa will help create that picture. And if there's time later, you can ask me about it and I'll tell you what that little system, what they unpicked and the surprises they got by doing it that way pictorially. But fundamentally, you're focusing on the system, not the parts. And we've had a tradition of always looking at the parts and thinking we can sum them, and we can't. What are the system patterns? How's the system behaving? And then we've got things like, are the patterns vicious or virtuous? Are they stabilizing? Are they stagnating? What's actually going on around there? And where might intervention points be that have sort of virtuous effects across the system? There's also benefits of sharing power. The benefits of sharing power differ on how much power is shared. So there's huge work going on now under the label engagement, and that could have been equal with participation, but we had some linguistic drift on that. And engagement is now working at the lower two categories on the left-hand side. So starting at the bottom, you've got information giving to raise awareness of others about what you've done or decided, information gathering to develop your own knowledge. So that might be through surveys, it could be even through workshops or whatever. You gather lots of data to develop your own understanding and make your own decisions. Consultation to be open to influence about what's going on, but you're still retaining decision power. And shifting role completely if you're environmental professional body commissioning this kind of stuff, and you become shared decision makers with others. And all the good claims, all the good stuff that are claimed for participation engagement actually only really deliver when you're really sharing a lot of power. So the social capital built, that's the trust and reciprocity to catalyse action, the knowledge, the richness of knowledge, that decisions are therefore better informed, that solutions are more integrated, and you get this buy-in and commitment to action. And you don't really get it at these lower levels. And I think that's really quite widely misunderstood. So here's some research about the benefits of sharing power. So it makes the point in this first paragraph that the benefits claimed for involving others don't really pan out unless you're sharing power in a high quality decision-making process. But that if you do that, then power shared through good practice, participation, results in better outputs in terms of their ambition, agreement and stringency, which therefore leads to better outcomes. Now, people say, prove that you get better outcomes from these kind of processes, but that's quite challenging because the process itself can span maybe a year, but the outcomes, especially in environmental terms, like in terms of, I don't know, restored peatland or amount of carbon sequestered or how much cleaner the river ends up being, will all take quite a prolonged amount of time. So then it becomes hard to say, well, we got there because of that. But it can set things in a much better direction if you do this. So this is a little bit about why regulators can't share decision power. Can share decision power. So we often getting told that that's not possible. So I'm going to tell a little story with this diagram. So imagine party A on the left-hand side and party B at the bottom are two people working. They're in a celebrity master chef, and they're trying to get money for their own preferred charity. And they're rushing, the clock's against them. They're rushing to get their dish prepared, and there's a lemon. They both need a lemon, so they reach out. There's one last lemon available, and they both reach out to grab the lemon. And then one says, "No, but I've got to have the lemon because I'm getting money together to I don't know, conserve this incredibly rare, precious thing." And somebody else says, no, but I need the money because I'm working with drug addicted children. And an argument ensues, and they get very positional and argumentative, and in frustration, somebody just grabs a knife and slices the lemon in half, and each get half the lemon. So now both dishes will be less good, but then one throws the skin away and the other throws the fruit away. So there was the possible to get up here and find win-win. That possibility existed in real life, but they didn't find it, and they weren't going to in that context. And the reason that we don't find those wins is because we operate on the left-hand side of this table. So the positional adversarial behaviour. Now, adversarial doesn't mean you're being rude and unpleasant to people, but just you think that if you're going to advantage your interests, it's at their cost. So then you better not allow yourself any empathy towards them, or that could weaken your own negotiating position. And then you engage in the behaviours on the left-hand side. So withholding information, making threats, arguing from your position about what you must have, what you have to have or need, attacking them or their knowledge, putting your effort and energy into defending your position, grinding down the other side, and seeking win-lose, because the more you win, the more they lose. And that's the territory you think you're in. However, if you take a completely different approach, which is the stuff we're facilitating all the time, then it's called principled or cooperative behaviour. Some of this comes from Harvard, Getting to Yes, and I forget his name, Yuri. Anyway, and it's instead of which you start by sharing loads of information with each other, asking lots of questions, exploring different interests and needs, then exploring different knowledges and perspectives, and then you then start working on seeking potential solutions, and then together working on the challenge, and then you get far more likely to get to certainly greater mutual benefit all round, and sometimes the most surprising win-wins that nobody ever imagined to begin with. And that all comes to changing behaviour. So how do you do that in environmental decision making? Well, fundamentally, it's to stop thinking the stakeholders are somebody out there and we're us and they're all our stakeholders or annoying stakeholders or whoever they are, and to start thinking who's actually holding decision power now, and how can we broaden that right out to have different knowledges, different perspectives, different interests, helping to negotiate. And we can easily run processes with 45, 50 people in the room negotiating. There's methods and techniques that make that entirely possible. And if you don't do it with these methods and techniques, the Dunbar number, which I don't have a slide or time to go into, would suggest you're probably working at maximum 15 people you could make an effective decision. And even at that number, some of the group are dominating the others. And what is coming out of that is a result of social dynamics, not actually wise decision making at all. So who's where? So it just means this is a potential, integrated management of a large area would require all these different interests and knowledges. And so some of those people need to be in that decision-making group. And then there will be beyond them people who are consulted, and beyond them maybe the general public. So I just want to now nip on to a little bit about psychology and decision-making. And I'm going to ask you a tiny little experiment. If you don't want to do this, nobody's going to know. This is just for you to think about as we do it, really quick. So here's an order of preference for eating particular fruit. So if somebody prefers an apple to a peach to a pear, do you agree that they would prefer an apple to a pear? And if you do, write on a little bit of paper. What do you think? Do you agree that's likely, or do you disagree that's likely? So, as it turns out, it's not true. And the researchers who worked on this experiment think that what was going on in people's minds is that at one point they're prioritising on flavour, on another shape and another colour, and that's all going on unconsciously. So the logic of this previous slide, that if that's the order you prefer it in, that's the order you're always going to prefer it in, is not true. Our choices can be very variable, especially when things that we're choosing about have multiple characteristics to them. And at one point we're choosing one kind of characteristic and another. So this is another little experiment that you can consider. So if you were in a large group of people and you were asked to say whether A or B was the long line, and everybody who went ahead of you said that B was the longest line visible, and you sat there puzzled and thinking, what's going on here? Would you agree with them, or would you speak up and say they were wrong? So maybe you want to say, yes, I'd speak up, or I'd agree with them. And as it turns out, you probably wouldn't speak up. And that's to do with social norming and the way that we're such social animals that we want to go along as much as possible with the crowd, with the people around us. And I don't have time to tell stories about this, but this is a really serious thing that goes on in group decision making, and why you need some real special techniques to stop it happening. So that you want norming in terms of we're going to behave with respect and listen to each other and negotiate together, but you don't want norming at decision points, because otherwise you can end up with some really false decisions. And we've had this view, we as environmentalists have had this view for a very long time, that they, whoever those other people are, just need better information. and that we assume that the problem with climate change and nature is an information deficit, and that we'll influence and persuade with information, but we overlook all sorts of psychological things. So there's inattentional blindness, which means our brains will only see what's relevant. So I don't know if you've ever, I don't know, bought a new car, you bought a new yellow car and you're driving around the motorway and every car is suddenly yellow because your brain's saying, oh, this is something we're interested in, let's look for yellow cars. And you're a bit blind to everything else. So inattentional blindness, confirmation bias, so you see what confirms and resonates with what you already know. And technical language is not well understood. So statistics work really well for people who know already something about it, but stories for people who are skeptical or don't know anything about it. And of course, we typically want to blizzard people with stats and graphs and maps and all sorts of ways of communicating like that. We also tend to assume that decision making is logical, but if you just did those two little experiments about the long line and the fruit, then you'll already know that maybe that's not true. And it turns out 95% of the decisions we make are based on heuristics, and a heuristic is a decision shortcut. And I don't have time to go into all of these, and this is only a small number of the shortcuts, but there's things like how easy the decision made, how familiar it is, how much effort you've already put in, that would be the sunk costs, functional fitness, there's optimism bias, there's a whole bunch of them, which our brains just go, this is all too complicated. It pulls one of these out of the bag and that makes our decision, and we don't really have consciousness about that when it's happened. Time of day, so don't ever get yourself in front of a lawyer in the middle of the afternoon if you could go to jail, because it's much more likely you will in the middle of the afternoon, but you wouldn't in the morning. And that's because as the day goes on, if you're in a high decision-making context, you hit decision fatigue and biochemical things are happening and you just can't make nuanced decisions anymore. And the mood, you had a row with somebody in your household and you nearly crumped somebody on the drive to work, and then suddenly you're going to make different decisions during the day than you would if you had a great day. And we also assume that understanding and belief lead to action. So there's this information deficit, give them the information, they'll start believing different things and that will drive action. And that is true when attitudes are really strong, action feels achievable, and the action is consistent with the person's own self-view. It's not true when what you're asking somebody to do is not consistent with their self-view. So if you're a motorhead and you're being asked to be a bit more thoughtful about climate change, that's a real uphill struggle to change your behaviour. So understanding this too is really relevant. And then there's a whole load of individual psychological barriers and solutions to change. So I don't have time to go through them all, but we obviously all have a natural bias to short-term and local things. And that's wired in, but then that makes it really difficult if we're trying to sort of think about climate change and nature loss and I don't know, other things that are really long term and much bigger, much wider scales, because our brains just aren't really wired to think like that. We really want autonomy and control, so pushing pro-environmental behaviours can just receive a real backlash and trigger sort of reactance. People want their own influence, they want to influence what's happening to them and around them. Pursuit of happiness and avoidance of negative emotions. So people don't want to hear that climate change is really bad because the emotional hit that they take if they really pay attention to that. And many of us in this room will be dealing with that every day, and that is hard. And self-esteem. So you've got cognitive dissonance and moral disengagement. If somebody is saying, oh, well, you're not doing a very good thing there, and challenges your sense of self-worth and self-esteem, your brain will rush to reconcile, well, are they right, I'm not a good person, or is their information wrong? And your brain will decide that information is wrong far more often and frequently than it ever wants to believe that you might be at fault. And then there's a whole lot of group barriers as well. So there's reputational face needs for groups. So if you start criticising them and ask those flipping farmers, those blinking fishermen, whatever it is that you think are a problem people, then they're being othered. And then those others, if they're on the receiving end of that, will just push back and it will just provoke anger and denial. Perceived community behaviour, so like what do we as a community or a group of people, how do we behave? And so then we norm to various sort of leading opinion leaders, and then the answer to that is that you need to draw in opinion leaders into the dialogue, into the decision making, create a norm of engagement and a norm of working creatively and respectfully and with an open mind to find solutions. So there's a whole bunch of others, but I don't have time to go into them all. But anyway, that there are very real psychological barriers to change, and environmentalists are always triggering these without realising them. So they're causing the problem, if you like. So what works then? So this is an adaptation from a pretty thorough bit of research that was done and reported on in 2018. And the blue in the middle is kind of, these are the things to be attentive to. So what makes for a conducive context, which would be open-minded to these approaches, supportive of these approaches, embracing what comes out, that it's designed and not ad hoc, because ad hoc procedures can trigger new conflicts and disempower people. I don't have time to fully explain the mechanisms around that, but that is how it works. Participants, that there's systematic representation, that you've really done your work about what does an equitable balance of knowledges and interests look like. Power, that you're sharing power. I've mentioned that a few times. Scale of fit, so what is being talked about is matching to the spatial scales. Temporal fit, so at an early stage when options are open, and underpinning governance of what's going on, ideally regenerative governance. So I'm just going to say, well, what's regenerative governance then? So if you're really familiar with the regenerative word, coming into regenerative soils, regenerative farming, I've started hearing regenerative water management. So the regenerative word is sort of really getting traction in our sector, but I've not really yet heard anybody talking about regenerative governance, and here's hoping this changes. But regenerative governance is really shifting away from the top-down, we know best kind of governance. So the petals around this, you start with an ethos of service and being stewards and enablers, not I've got this role in the governance out of status and to control others. There's a wide range of perspectives. There's long-term thinking and adaptive thinking. That the ethos is to share power around co-design and to coordinate, and the task is to coordinate and mobilize effort in a sort of shared future. That you lead in a way that is faithful to what's been agreed in the decision-making process with others, and you're enabling and coordinating that. You're devolving power and resources as much as possible for delivery, and that you've got reflective practice. So you regularly come and say, how's this working? Are we standing by our ethics? Are we delivering this in a co-creative way? Are we respecting stakeholders? And you actually pause and reflect on how you're doing and keep learning. And that's really quite different to a lot of the governance that goes on now. And then in procedural justice, I can't go all of that. That picture on the left is a kind of, we make little maps like this or little diagrams like this of the process designs that we come up for. What's the design during your planning change and what's the design during implementing change? But it's characterized by certain crucial things. So the decision making is transparent and just. The planned inclusion for legitimacy, unbiased neutral design and facilitation. Now, it doesn't mean some independent organisation like my own, but it does mean that the people doing that's their primary focus, is a good process, well designed and good facilitation, and they let go of any investment in the content or the outcomes, and they're trusted to do that and be able to behave in that neutral way. It's based on deliberative and principled negotiation, so that idea that I talked about, seeking out win-wins, and then working together, all stakeholders together, and if you're at a local level working with communities, work together as equals to share their knowledge, agree priorities, co-produce ideas, and move on to implementing change. And I just want to say something about this language of co-production, co-design, co-create, co-delivery, co-benefits, all sorts of things. So this was really exciting, and some of this comes from Eleanor Ostrom way back in the 70s and the work she did and got Nobel Prizes for. But it's got massive linguistic drift now. So we're seeing calls come through for work that want to take a co-production approach. That's what they're telling us. They want to co-design and co-deliver. And as soon as you ask anything about how the power is playing out around that, it's just the same old top-down decision makers inviting a few other people to come and have a say, but they will hold on to decision-making power. So that people are just relabeling old ways of working with this language, and it's not what was intended by this language. So we've got a real problem around linguistic drift with language around all of this, really. And so in that same theme, be really careful about the difference between participation and engagement. So this engagement word has now come to mean really quite superficial levels of engagement or influence, where it's the most incredible methods and techniques can be used, but fundamentally it's ways of getting knowledge out of people to inform a separate different decision-making group, which will primarily be, because we're not a diverse profession, so it will primarily be white, educated, all got degrees, predominantly male. That's who are actually making the decisions in the environment sector at the moment. So that's engagement, whereas participation, you already got the sense of, is this in-depth deliberation with multiple perspectives trying to work out what the best way forward is. So there we go. Just made it 35 minutes. I know I've hit you with an awful lot of concepts and thoughts. Some will be familiar to you, some won't. But I am open for questions. I'll stop sharing, actually. Let me stop sharing. Stop sharing.
Thank you, Diana. So much in there, so much food for thought. Would anybody like to ask a question?
Sorry, I'd be interested in asking a question. Just to say, one thing, obviously, this area to do it is it does lead to higher quality in many ways. My question really is about the fact that in practice you often have a lot of pressure to get things done yesterday, maybe by seniors, maybe some who perhaps don't buy into this quite as much, and so I suppose that's a challenge in terms of you're trying to do the right quality approach, but it takes time. It's slower to engage and to build the code practices and so on, and the culture. So I'd be interested in your thoughts about how you go about trying to persuade seniors, maybe, or others, not only seniors, but basically others on this approach.
Thank you, Richard. Well, I think my answer, I mean, there's so many different answers to that. Obviously, some of them in the presentation you've just heard about quality practice and things. But of course, there are always time pressures. But I suspect that the time that people think engagement takes is not what it takes. So we can do, I don't know, the deliberative, a process around a new. Last year we did a process around a new strategy for Jersey around their new tree strategy, which was very holistic. So it was everything from biosecurity to new trees development, the whole bit. And we did that across 4 months with 2 workshops, wider engagement. And by the time the report was written, the laws had already been changed there. Now, I know Jersey can work in a very different way, but those timeframes are not, people think, oh, it takes years and years, and it really doesn't. This is a deliberative negotiation I'm talking about, and so it doesn't take that kind of time. But of course, I don't think this should be done everywhere in all circumstances. Absolutely, when there needs to be quick, fast, especially in emergencies or crises, we've just got the experts together to make a decision, boom, get on with it. But also, I think that there's the question around what happens if we don't do it this way? How long could we be locked into legal challenge, direct action, trigger campaigns, and hit an absolute impasse and not be able to move forward at all? And I know a case where they did that, and they're not going to be able to go back into that area, do anything productive around the environment in that area for probably 10 to 15 years. They have done so much damage. So there's always the opportunity cost, or not the opportunity, the cost of not doing it. And where those are small and the cost of doing it is too high, then for sure the decision needs to be different. But that's part of what I would say is, what happens if we don't do it in this particular circumstance? How much time of public money and resources and effort and energy is going to go in to trying to solve a mess that we create because we go top down and make a decision and tell people? So that would be one of the things I think.
Thank you, Richard. I'd like to bring in Laura now. Laura Hunt, would you like to ask a question, Laura?
Yeah, so hi, thanks for the talk. It was super interesting. I work in the Chief Scientist group on different research projects, and we've got a big package of work that's around trying to bring more kind of co-production methods and participatory methods into our research. And one of the things that we've been finding is that a lot of the effective kind of case studies of using these methods are for more localized, place-based type topics, but a lot of our work is around sort of national kind of on that national scale. So I was wondering if you had any sort of tips or techniques, or like reading or any case studies about applying that sort of co-production, participation, or like engagement methods at that national scale, where there is I guess the place-based type approaches are different, and the kind of connections that people will feel with the environment are very different.
Yeah, Sure. Well, I can give you an example that actually won an award a couple of years ago that we were doing, which was for the then Bays, working with Grantham Institute and Oxford University. So this was in a research context. This was doing research in a very collaborative way, but it was bringing global experts in the physical, ecological, economic and social impacts of climate change together, shockingly to me, for the first time, to start co-creating new research collaborations that could ramp up the findings and some of the models are really questionable, and get that all in a better place. And we did the work. It was all meant to be all glamorous in Oxford, and it ended up being in COVID online for a week, which was quite a strain. But even so, some massive new collaborations got started that will be underway for some years. But they also had some rapid collaborations that went within months to the Biden administration and the UK administration and changed the way they negotiated at COP27. So if you want to go from collaboration to new ideas to research impact, that's got to be right up there, you know. And if you want, we entered that for a best practice award, and in the institute I'm part of, it won the inaugural 2030 Impact Award. I don't really think anybody else stood a chance with that story. But anyway, that's been written up we rarely get able to write up, but I can send that to you, Laura, if you want to contact me. So I hope that gives you an inspiration that absolutely it's possible.
Thank you, Laura. Rich, I'll come to you in a minute. I'm just going to bring in my last little yellow hand, and I'd like to bring in Yadwinder Sidhu. I hope I've said your name correctly. Please ask your question.
Hi, Bev. Thanks. You have. Hi, Diana. Yad. Nice to meet you again.
Yeah, absolutely.
And lovely to hear the concepts that you have talked us through. I've been getting, since we last spoke, a lot more interested in governance and sort of, you know, partly from our land use work, where we're learning that, you know, in this polycentric space, I think the role of government has changed from being able to influence a lot bigger part of the system to now probably very little, where there's a lot of agency by other actors who can facilitate change. And in that context, I think your regenerative governance idea seems quite sort of timely. My question is, Diana, are there any case studies of where that has been practiced and has effectively delivered change? So the only thing I could go back to was the New York river water management work that was talked about by a colleague from Exeter University, which wasn't regen, but definitely was quite polycentric, brought a lot of people together. But I want to ask you, if on regen, if you have any case studies that you could share with us.
I think the concept, so I'm going to fess up here that I came up with the phrase regenerative governance in this research that we're doing for Natural England about, I don't know, 3 months ago, and then Googled it and then found other people were beginning to frame that concept of governance with that kind of language. I've definitely got a place-based example, but I've also got a policy delivery interface one. So we did some work for Forest Research that finished, I think, I wasn't so embedded in it, so one of my other team members was leading on it, but it finished, I think, just before Easter. And that was policymakers, frontline staff and researchers working collaboratively in an incredibly collaborative way. I mean, it was very admirable in the implementation around tree disease health. And so I'd be very happy, Yard, to put you in touch with them. They contacted us to run a couple of workshops. So they've done a lot of reflective practice whilst they've been doing this. And we ran a workshop last year about how did those 3 different bits work together and what worked and where was the learning around where the sort of sticky bits were. And then this last piece of work we've done was them to reflect much more deeply on how had they established this regenerative governance kind. I don't think they'd use that language, but that is pretty much what they're doing. So yeah, I think that I think they've really had a bit of a breakthrough in how you can do policy development, pioneering new in their case tree health, and do it in this really, really lovely, equitable, respectful across differences way, and reflect on that and learn and keep improving. So I think they've got some really great stuff happening there. I don't know how public their report is that we I don't know. I kept saying to them, you're learning things here that really need to get out there. But yeah, I'd be happy to put you in touch with people doing it. So maybe they could, if the report is not public, that they would give it to you in confidence. I don't know. But
Yeah,
you've got my email, so email me and remind me of this.
Yeah, I've been meaning to follow up, so I'll follow up on this one and a couple of other things as well. So let's follow up separately.
Yeah,
Thanks,
sure.
Diana.
Okay, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Okay, thanks for your question, Yard. Tanya, if you can just, and Angela, who've got hands up, just hang on a second. I'm just going to go to Rich in the chat to see if there's any questions come into the chat.
There's lots and lots of questions coming through, and interestingly, the barriers that are kind of built in way before this. So, you know, Angela Gorman will talk about sometimes if you are a believer, you're limited by budget controls and cost of doing proper engagement. And Paula Pearson saying co-design, co-delivery, even our collaborative agreements require that EA has a final decision-making role. So our procurement governance is not always set up to avoid linguistic drift. And I'm sure there must be lots of other elements of that. I will come to Amrita Chandra. Lovely to hear from you again, Amrita. Brilliant to hear about the successes of working with such a diverse range of people. Thank you, Dinah. When it comes to bringing people together across cultural, language and geographical differences, what works best bringing people to work together across these things?
So that was cultural, language, and what was the third one?
Cultural, language and geographical differences.
Gosh,
what works best bringing these people together?
What works best? My word. Well, like in India, we are working with people from Japan, which is a very hierarchical, formal kind of culture, and people from India and the UK with bringing it from many different bits of the world. So there were multiple cultures there. They were all aligned in research. And we did work a bit in advance with the Japanese and saying, this is how it's going to be. Is that comfortable? How can we make it more comfortable for you? It'll be very interactive. And I'd say on the first day, they were a bit taken aback and a bit bewildered. It was a three-day event. But by day 2, they were laughing, they were joining in, they were loving it. We said, we've never seen anything like this. This is incredible. So I think part of what we do and the way we do it just taps into something very human. We've also worked at the very different end of the spectrum. We've done work in South America, which included with Indigenous people who were in the protected area management in Guyana. And they likewise, so some of them didn't have written and reading English, but then we flicked a whole bunch of methods that involve picture and description and story, but still the same principles around respect, listening, first of all sharing lots of knowledge, then generating solutions, then working out which solutions might really land. So do I think this is possible? Well, we've done it in so many different places. I don't know, we've done it with water managers from across the different Stanian countries. We were facilitating in a yurt in the mountains of Kazakhstan, if you want a really exciting and different context right there. But again, using these methods, initially they were a little bit bewildered and they loved it, and then they really getting into it, and the post-its were flying around and the ideas were flying around, the informality, the idea that what you say is taken on merit rather than the status often really surprises people. So we haven't yet got to a context where it really doesn't work, but I don't know, maybe that I'm yet to experience that.
Excellent, thank you. And lots of requests for information. We will share the slides and look for any other kind of information that we can share as well.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I don't know if I'm allowed to say this or not, but we do have some training courses coming up. So do ping us in an email. I'll pass them on to my team, and then if people are interested, they can connect with that.
Brilliant, thank you. Bev, do you want to go to questions?
Sorry. Yeah, Rich, and I was just going to say that's fine, Diana. Yeah, just you know, if you send me those details, I can put them in the chat.
Oh,
as
okay,
well.
Beth, that's lovely of you.
I think I can do that, Rich, can't I?
Well, let's be careful not to breach any procurement rules or anything, heavens. Oh, could I just come back on one of the last questions that you said, or something that was coming up about barriers and stuff and costs of doing this? And I think there's a real misunderstanding about the costs of doing this. If you do something like the Jersey tree strategy, I don't want to shoot myself in the foot here, but the Jersey tree strategy is a strategy that was very quickly going to change policy and law and practice in all sorts of ways around trees. I think with us doing all the design, prep, delivery and the report came in at about 60,000. And if you put that against legal challenges or years of direct action, I don't think that's a whole lot of money to spend on this kind of thing. So yeah, just to speak to the cost of doing this is maybe nothing like you might imagine. If you do something where you've got thousands and thousands of people engaged in all sorts of incredibly interesting and engaging and fun ways, that can cost an arm and a leg, but no power shifting in that. So actually that's sort of education and, I don't know, influencing and so on, but it's not really participation. So the participation piece itself, I mean, obviously it depends on context, but I don't think it has to cost as much as some people might imagine.
Yep, thanks, Diana. And as regards, I'm just going to bring in Tanya in a second, but as regards your training courses and things, I can put a marker into your, you know, your information. It's not, you know, I'm not promoting it, and we do have to follow our usual, all our procurement rules, but I'm very happy to put a flag in, you know, a link. Tanya, would you like to ask a question?
Yes, it was just a quick clarification. When you're talking about norming, Diane, were you talking about groupthink, or is that a different thing?
Well, this is where I have to say I'm an environmental scientist, not a psychologist or social scientist, so I'm not entirely sure. However, what I mean by norming, so norming or groupthink, well, groupthink would certainly be a type of norming. But norming is, I'll give you a funny little story. How many minutes have we got? Not many. So norming is the power. Get in a lift and try and stand the wrong way round, and you'll feel the power of norming on you about how unbelievably uncomfortable that is. So we're constantly picking up cues from each other about how we behave, how we dress, how we speak. It can stop you getting out of a burning building because nobody's saying, get out now. We're all norming to, oh, is it a drill? Is it not a drill? Do we move? Do we not move? And they think that's why people don't get out of burning buildings or sinking ships. And I once had the enormous privilege of being at an event where David Attenborough was speaking. There were about 300 people in the audience. And I wanted to lead a standing ovation. You know, he's quite old and frail now. And I wanted to lead a standing ovation because I think he's wonderful. And I could not, I know this stuff, I could not get myself to stand up. I couldn't do it. So then he walks out, and I think if they bring him back in for a standing ovation, I'm not going to think about anything else. The second his foot hits that step, I'm going to stand. And I did. And the whole room got up behind me and stamped and shouted, and he got a standing ovation. So this parasocial norming, it's like when you understand that we affect each other and influence it that much, I don't know, go try on the train on the way back, smiling to lots of people on the train.
Oh, I do that anyway. I smile at everybody.
Well done you, Tanya. You're willing to break some
you can see some people like,
I'm all for that.
Oh, I don't know. And then they're like, oh, yeah.
So it's affecting us all the time in a myriad of different ways. And of course, it affects decision making. And you'll be in a decision making group and you will see people norm to each other. And norm to like some very dominant, charismatic individual say, this is what we need to do. And everybody just falls into line. And it's not necessarily the best decision at all.
Yeah, I've seen that. You mentioned courses, which is brilliant. I'm very interested in that. But I just wondered if you had any like facilitation packs, like just kind of a framework pack, because I think I've had experience of bringing people on board, you know, to getting people together, but I'm sure I can learn a load more from you. And I just wondered if you had anything you could share.
Well, I do have a book, but it was about 95% written and then COVID. And the bit on online working was about half a page. So now I need to write about another 5 chapters and I haven't had a chance to do it. We've got case examples. We very rarely, as I say, get up because we're, you know, time is our, you know, we have to earn to exist. So we very rarely ask to get able to do it, but there are some case examples on our website. Ooh. So there's those resources. And if you read a case example, you'll certainly begin to see how did they go about that then. But we don't until I get this flipping. But I mean, we've got our training manuals and stuff, but then you have to be doing the course to get it. So, yeah, I'm really sorry that we don't have anything. Just say, here you go, run with it. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, that's great. If we could have the website in the chat, that would be awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, I can't hear you, Bev. I think you're on mute.
Oh, sorry, I heard some noise in the background. I apologise. I was thanking Tanya for a question. Only a couple of minutes left. Angela, can I bring you in to ask your question?
Thanks. Yeah, I will try to keep it quick. Hi, Diana.
Hi.
I've been involved in quite a lot of consultations in my past because I used to work for Groundwork, and that was all about community consultation. So I know there's sort of, should we say, extra challenges that come with bringing people together who are not your experts in the field. They're not your usual suspects. And you then have to change the way that you deliver your information. And I don't mean completely dumbing it down, but you do have to change it. You have to make it accessible. And I think your slide about what is the purpose of your event is really important. You know, is it literally engaging and sharing information and getting a few comments back, or is it right at the other end where you really do want to have collaborative decision making and there is something on offer to change, you know, the ability to change something? My question relates to the difficulties that might be faced by the Environment Agency, particularly involving people who, just take, for example, river basin planning and, you know, involvement in that. A lot of people who are educated or are engaged, they kind of get it. They might not all agree. They certainly don't all agree, but they get it. If you then widen it out to try and get more people who haven't been engaged before, I think the concern is attacks, sort of in a, not a physical way, but, you know, verbal attacks on the Environment Agency because of the water pollution from water companies, and completely sort of, not completely separate, but different issues other than the one you really want to discuss. So that then means you need really good facilitation, which is why I think it is important to engage professionals. So have you got sort of any comments on that, sort of the fear factor that comes in of engaging much wider audiences?
The fear factor in a minute, I think I've got, haven't I, before this needs to close. Right then, I better speak fast. Right. It doesn't need to be there. With people who know what they're doing, it doesn't need to be there. So, because if people, there's a lot in what you said. So some of it is about knowledge. So I just want to say, if they're in the room in a deliberative process, it's because they've got knowledge. Now, it may not be science knowledge, it may be social knowledge, it may be how my community behaves, it might be how my ethnicity will behave if there's a flood. I don't know. They're in the room because they're an opinion leader or somebody from, they might be science, whatever, they've got knowledge. So we identify stakeholders not by power and influence, but by knowledge. What knowledges do we need for this to end up with wise decisions? So then that should be respected as equally, and as much care taken around communicating that in everyday language. We have guidelines about, you know, everybody try and use everyday language so we all understand each other, those acronyms, those ways of speaking that can confuse. So let's really work at that. So we set that up. So I think it's not about seeing the EA and your stakeholders and calling them your well, I don't want to assume you're doing that, Angela, but people we work with do. They're not your stakeholders. The EA and all of those other people are stakeholders in something that's got to change, a new flood channel, a new coastal defence, whatever it is. You're all stakeholders together. So it's about instantly beginning to sort of more equalise the understanding of who we are, and we're all bringing knowledge of different bits of the jigsaw together. And then in terms of, just thinking of the time, we're out of time. I don't have time really to say about handling tricky behaviour, but let's just say we've got skills and techniques that enable people to be safely in the same space. Happy to speak separately, Angela.
Thank you.
Thank you, Angela. Diana, that was absolutely fantastic. You know, your energy was infectious, and it's clearly a massive topic which we've only just touched on. So I'd just like to thank everyone for their questions. I'm sorry we haven't got round to everyone, but of course a huge thank you to Diana on behalf of the science profession and everybody on the call. You know, thanks for sharing your knowledge and your precious time with us. Just very quickly, the science profession seminar series will have a bit of a break now until September, while everybody takes their holidays. So we'll be back on the 12th of September. Just, we'll send out details, but our ecologist community will be continuing with some seminars in the meantime. If you want to know anything else about the science profession, please get in touch with me. And thank you everyone for joining us today.
Thanks very much, Bev. Thank you, everybody, for giving your time to hear me. Hope you went away with something useful. Do I stay on, Bev?